wanted to understand the history of our institutions before they were captured by feminists and Marxists. And, well, you're looking for the unvarnished red pill perspective.
Exactly.
You're a learner, you are insanely curious, and you want to understand the exact architecture of the modern cultural landscape.
You want the blueprints.
Right, the blueprints. Well, you are in the right place. But before we jump into mapping out this territory today, please hit that like button and subscribe to the deep dive.
Yeah, definitely do that.
Today, we are reviewing a compelling, ultra-long, and highly incisive new ebook that has been making massive waves in the manosphere.
Massive waves is an understatement.
It really is. So to help you decide if you want to buy this book, we are unpacking its most explosive and fascinating claims.
And there are a lot of them.
Oh yeah. Now, if you want to follow along or grab a copy for yourself, check Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to purchase it right now.
You're also going to want to follow the author at Conrad Riker on Substack.
Right. So the source material today is called Magna Carta Pro Viris, Androcentric Great Charter Against Gamma Bias by Conrad Riker.
Which is a heavy title.
It's a huge title. And the author describes this work as his words, a tactical nuclear strike against the Cathedral of Lies.
Yeah. It is a striking, highly aggressive way to frame a book.
Coley.
And it absolutely sets the tone for everything we're going to explore today. I mean, this text does not pull its punches.
It really doesn't. Now, I want to make a clear conversational disclaimer right up front.
Always important.
Right. As your guides on this deep dive, we aren't taking sides or endorsing the politics here.
No, not at all.
Our job is to impartially extract the core arguments, logic, and philosophy of this text so you can understand the exact worldview being presented.
We are mapping the territory so you can navigate it yourself.
Precisely.
So our mission today is to systematically break down Riker's philosophy. We're going to look at everything from the concept of gamma bias in corporate human resources to the biological game theory of modern marriage to the ancient intellectual weapons of the Trivium.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the foundational worldview of the text.
Yeah, the core premise.
Riker centers his entire initial argument around this concept of gamma bias in the modern corporation.
Right.
And to ground this, he doesn't start with abstract theory. He starts with a story about a guy named Marcus.
Which is a great way to anchor it.
Yeah. So let's build the scene here. Marcus is a senior project manager.
Okay.
He has 12 years of stellar performance reviews, 3 successful, highly profitable product launches under his belt.
So he's the guy.
He is the guy you rely on to get things done.
The archetypal competent producer.
Exactly. So Marcus is sitting in a quarterly budget meeting.
Standard corporate stuff.
Right. It's him, the executive team, and a newly hired diversity director who has just presented a set of marketing projections. The executives ask Marcus why the marketing department's new, highly optimistic projections don't seem to align with the actual historical revenue data the company has on file.
Which, in any rational business environment, is a standard, essential inquiry.
You'd think so.
I mean, you have to reconcile the projections with reality.
Right. So Marcus does what a competent project manager does.
He shows the data.
He pulls up a spreadsheet on the projector. He walks through the arithmetic.
Okay.
He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't hurl insults. He doesn't mock the diversity director.
He's just being professional.
Completely. He simply shows the numbers, demonstrating mathematically that the aspirational targets set by this new director are physically impossible based on the historical data.
He just points out the discrepancy.
Right. And what happens?
Well, you'd assume he's rewarded for saving the company from a disastrous financial miscalculation.
You would absolutely think so. But no. The diversity director begins to cry, claiming she feels attacked and unsafe.
Wow.
Yeah. The meeting is abruptly halted.
Just like that.
It's just like that. 2 hours later, Marcus is escorted from the building by security.
Unbelievable.
He is fired. And this separation paperwork doesn't mention his spreadsheet or his math.
Of course not. What does it say?
It cites creating an atmosphere of intimidation and failure to embody company values of inclusivity.
And this right here is the crux of Riker's argument regarding gamma bias.
Exactly.
The author points out that for the sheer act of basic numeracy, a man with a mortgage and kids was sacrificed by the institution.
Yeah.
Why? Because demonstrating that someone is factually wrong is now treated as an act of violence against their self-esteem.
Which is wild. Riker argues that in the modern corporation, competence is literally treated as a hate crime against mediocrity.
A hate crime against mediocrity.
That is a wild phrase.
Yeah.
But when you look at the Marcus story, you see exactly what he means.
You really do.
The institution prioritized the emotional comfort of one employee over the mathematical reality presented by another.
And what's fascinating here is the theoretical framework Riker uses to explain why this shift has occurred.
Right, he goes deep.
He does. He doesn't just blame modern politics. He goes deep into 19th century philosophy.
Yeah.
He relies heavily on Arthur Schopenhauer, specifically his 1851 essay on women.
Which is intense.
Very. The text argues that we are currently living in a Schopenhauerian reality.
Wait, let's look there for a second. Schopenhauer wrote that essay over 170 years ago.
Right?
Isn't it a bit dated to apply 19th century German philosophy to a 2026 HR department?
Well, Riker would argue that human biology and evolutionary psychology do not change just because we invented iPhones and cubicles.
Fair point.
Schopenhauer posited that the feminine imperative is fundamentally biologically wired for security, emotion, and resource acquisition.
Okay, so biological drives.
Exactly. And the author connects this to older biological concepts like hypergamy.
The evolutionary drive to secure the best possible genes and the highest level of resources for offspring.
Precisely.
Okay, I track with hypergamy. But the book also mentions Birthright law. Unpack that for the listener, because Riker leans on it heavily.
Yeah, Robert Birthright was a surgeon and anthropologist who formulated this law in 1927.
Okay.
Birthright's law essentially states that the female, not the male, determines all the conditions of the animal family.
All the conditions.
All of them. Where the female can derive no benefit from association with the male, no such association takes place.
So it's very transactional.
It's a purely transactional view of evolutionary biology. The female dictates the terms of the relationship based entirely on what she can extract for survival and comfort.
So how does Riker take a 1927 biological observation about the animal kingdom and apply it to Marcus sitting in a corporate boardroom?
Well, Riker argues that this feminine psychology inherently prioritizes immediate emotional safety and practical resource-based security over abstract reasoning or the pursuit of objective truth.
Because safety is the priority.
Exactly.
Yeah.
An animal in the wild doesn't care about the philosophy of a predator. It cares about the feeling of danger.
Right, that makes sense.
So Riker extrapolates that when you take this specific evolutionary psychology and install it into institutional power like a modern human resources department,
Oh, I see.
you get environments that function as inquisitions against competence.
He literally calls modern corporate environments daycare centers for grown-ups.
Yes.
Places where comfort is valued above skill, where inclusivity trumps reality, and where adult men are constantly scolded and even fired for pointing out obvious, mathematically verifiable truths that happen to upset someone.
Which perfectly explains the fate of Marcus and his spreadsheet.
Right.
The math was objective truth, but it disrupted the emotional safety of the diversity director.
Yeah.
Therefore, in a Schopenhauerian reality, the math had to be punished.
The text also gives a really stark warning to you, the listener, about falling into what Riker calls a bleep pill trance.
This is a crucial warning.
He says men are biologically complicit in this dynamic because of the halo effect. This is this biological trick where men naturally project virtue and innocence onto women, putting them on a pedestal entirely because of a reproductive imperative.
Yes, the author argues you have to consciously, aggressively override this biological programming.
Because if you don't,
If you just default to believing that a woman's tears in a boardroom are an indicator of objective moral rightness, you fall victim to what the manosphere calls the rationalization hamster.
the rationalization hamster. We've all been in those corporate meetings where you can practically hear the wheels squeaking in someone's head as they try to justify a terrible idea.
Oh, absolutely.
But how does the book define the rationalization hamster specifically?
It is a very vivid metaphor for a cognitive mechanism where logic is frantically twisted to retroactively justify emotional impulses as if they were objective facts.
So the emotion comes first.
Always.
Yeah.
In this framework, a woman's internal feelings become her external facts.
Wow.
Any argument she makes is just a post hoc rationalization tool to align the external world with her internal emotional landscape.
Let me see if I have this right. So if the diversity director's feelings dictate that Marcus is intimidating because his math made her feel incompetent,
Yes.
then in her reality, Marcus is objectively intimidating, regardless of what the actual audio transcript of the meeting said.
You have it exactly. Her emotion creates the reality.
And the HR department just goes along with it.
The HR department, operating under the feminine imperative, validates that reality and executes the firing.
That is, man. That's heavy.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the text argues that this dynamic doesn't just stay in the corporate boardroom.
It scales up.
It scales up to the macro level.
Right. Riker views the modern state itself, specifically the massive welfare system and the family courts, as the ultimate beta male proxy.
That is a critical concept in the book.
The beta male proxy.
Historically, women influence the world directly through their husbands or families.
Yeah.
Today, the text claims they use the state as their proxy to extract resources from men.
Through taxes and courts.
Through progressive taxation, through alimony, through child support, the state forcibly extracts resources from the male population to fund female choices and security.
Often without any reciprocal obligation required from the woman.
Exactly. The state becomes the violent enforcer of the feminine imperative.
That is a massive, sweeping paradigm to drop on the listener.
It's the core of his worldview.
Right. And
Okay.
if that is the landscape, if the corporate institutions are captured, if the state is acting as a proxy enforcer, and if logic is actively being punished, how on earth does the author suggest a man fights back? You just quit society.
Well, Riker does eventually discuss checking out of certain systems, but his primary tactical advice is about intellectual combat.
Okay, intellectual combat.
He calls it weaponizing the mind. And the primary weapon he advocates for isn't new, it's ancient.
What?
It is the Trivium.
The Trivium. I know that's the ancient Western education model that built the intellects of the classical world, the Greeks, the Romans.
Yes.
It consists of 3 pillars: grammar, logic, and rhetoric. But how does an ancient educational philosophy help Marcus in an HR meeting?
Riker uses a brilliant, highly kinetic analogy here. He compares the Trivium to mixed martial arts.
MMA.
Yeah. He grounds this abstract, classical philosophy in physical combat.
Okay, break that down for me.
So grammar, the first pillar, is your stance. It's your basic jab.
Right.
In intellectual terms, grammar is the raw data, the exact, mutually agreed upon definitions of words.
A is A.
Exactly. Before you can debate systemic bias, you have to define what the word systemic means. You need the raw facts.
Okay, so grammar is the jab. What is logic?
Logic is the combination of punches. It is cause and effect.
Okay.
If I jab to the body, you drop your guard, I throw the cross over the top.
Right.
In debate, logic is the syllogism. If premise A is true and premise B is true, then conclusion C must follow. It is the mechanics of how ideas interact.
And rhetoric, the third pillar, is the effectiveness.
Yes.
It is the knockout blow or the properly applied chokehold.
Precisely. And Riker makes a deeply pragmatic point here. You cannot rhetoric your way out of a rear naked choke.
No, you definitely cannot.
If someone has you in a joint lock, your subjective truth, your lived experience, or your feelings about systemic oppression do not matter.
Physics asserts itself.
Reality asserts itself.
And the author believes men have abandoned grammar and logic, and they try to jump straight to rhetoric, which just leaves them flailing.
Yes. The left, he argues, has weaponized language by attacking grammar directly.
They chose the definitions of words.
They do. They turn riot into mostly peaceful protest.
They turn preference into phobia.
Exactly. Riker says you cannot fight back with rhetoric if your opponent has already altered the grammar.
Because you're not even speaking the same language anymore.
Men need to use the full trivium to establish reality before they argue about it.
He gives some very specific, tactical examples of how to do this, drawing again on Schopenhauer, specifically his stratagems for winning arguments.
The extension stratagem.
Yes, the one that really stood out is the extension stratagem. This is essentially a Socratic trap, right?
It is. The extension stratagem involves taking an opponent's premise and pushing it to its absolute absurd logical conclusion.
You don't argue the premise.
No, you accept it temporarily to show how it destroys itself.
The book uses a great example of this.
It does.
Riker says, let's say a feminist is arguing with you and claims that the patriarchy is entirely toxic, destructive, and inherently evil.
Okay.
You don't get defensive. You apply the extension. You point out that the patriarchy, which Riker defines as masculine energy directed toward productive, structural ends, built the iPhone she is currently using to tweet her complaints.
Right.
It built the internet infrastructure she is broadcasting on. It built the electrical grid powering her climate-controlled home.
You extend her logic to the environment she inhabits.
Exactly. You force her into a corner where she must either reject the infrastructure she relies on daily, throw away her phone, turn off her power, or admit that her premise that patriarchy is entirely destructive is flawed.
You force the opponent to confront the glaring contradictions in their own logic.
You don't defend yourself, you dismantle their foundation.
It is about forcing a structured confrontation. And that leads to another historical concept Riker revives to deal with corporate environments.
The pad's arm.
The passive arms.
This is fascinating. This is a medieval martial tradition, right?
Yes. In the Middle Ages, a knight would sometimes declare he was holding a specific bridge or a mountain pass.
He'll get challenged.
He would put out a declaration offering regulated, formal combat to any knight who wished to cross.
Regulated being the key word there.
Exactly. It wasn't a messy tavern brawl, it was highly structured jousting or swordplay with specific rules, witnesses, and heralds.
So he takes this medieval jousting concept and applies it to dealing with modern HR departments or social media mobs. How?
Through the strategy of radical formalization.
Radical formalization.
The text argues that the feminized administrative state HR, university tribunals, Twitter mobs, thrives on ambiguity, informal pressure, whispers, and plausible deniability.
They don't want to leave a paper trail.
HR doesn't want to formally accuse you of a crime. They want to have a chat about some concerns regarding your tone.
Right, they want to keep it vague so they can manipulate the outcome.
Exactly. Riker says you must use the pod arm. When they ask for an informal chat, you demand written accusations.
You demand named accusers.
You demand documented evidence of policy violations. You refuse to speak without representation or a recording.
You drag them out of the shadow.
You drag them out of the shadows of informal gossip and force them to fight you on the brightly lit terrain of formal logic, grammar, and evidence.
He contrasts a few famous examples to show how this works, or, crucially, how it fails when men don't use it.
Yes.
Let's look at James Damore.
James Damore is presented as a tragic cautionary tale in the book.
For listeners who might not remember, Damore was a software engineer at Google.
Right.
The company asked for feedback on their diversity programs.
And he gave it to them.
He wrote a heavily researched, incredibly polite, logically structured memo, citing mainstream biological and psychological studies to explain why there might be a gender gap in tech that isn't solely due to sexism.
He cited differences in trait agreeableness and interest in things versus people.
Right. He used grammar and logic.
He did. And his fatal error, according to Riker, was trying to reason with a system that had already completely abandoned logic in favor of the feminine imperative.
Damore thought he was entering a good faith debate.
He really did. But the Google system viewed him as a heretic who had committed blasphemy against their emotional reality.
He was fired and smeared globally.
Damore played by the old rules of intellectual engagement in a system that was operating under a Schopenhauerian reality.
It just doesn't work.
No. In contrast, Riker holds up two very different public figures as successful applications of the pod arm.
Brett Kavanaugh and Johnny Depp?
Yes. Brett Kavanaugh during his Supreme Court confirmation hearing, and Johnny Depp during his defamation lawsuit against Amber Heard.
Let's break those down. When Brett Kavanaugh was accused of decades-old misconduct with zero corroborating evidence, he didn't do what Republicans usually do.
He didn't fold.
He didn't apologize for his privilege. He didn't softly withdraw to save the institution. He counterattacked.
He displayed righteous masculine anger.
He named the political motivations behind the attack and refused to accept the premise of his guilt. He fought back aggressively.
And look at Johnny Depp. When Amber Heard wrote her op-ed, Depp lost his career overnight.
Immediately.
The cathedral of media and Hollywood instantly believed her based on the halo effect and the booth of female victimhood.
We'll talk about the booth later, but yeah.
Depp didn't go to therapy. He didn't do a tearful apology tour on daytime television. He sued her for defamation.
He executed the pod arms.
Perfectly.
Yeah.
He forced the conflict out of the court of public opinion, which is ruled by emotion, and dragged it into a literal courtroom.
Because a courtroom is a structured arena.
Where hearsay is objected to, where evidence is mandatory, and where cross-examination is executed under penalty of perjury.
He forced a formal trial, and the emotional narrative collapsed under the weight of objective logic.
Which brings us to the core actionable tactic Riker offers you, the listener, if you find yourself targeted by an institution.
Right, the protocol.
He outlines a strategy based on Robert Axelrod's game theory, specifically the tit-for-tat strategy.
Walk us through tit for tat.
Axelrod ran computer simulations of the prisoner's dilemma to see which strategy yielded the highest survival rate over time.
And the winner was always tit for tat.
Yes. The rule is simple. You cooperate first, you are polite, you are professional.
What?
But the instant you are attacked or betrayed, you immediately mirror the aggression. You punish the defection.
You do not turn the other cheek.
Because in game theory, turning the other cheek just invites predators to continually exploit you.
To execute this in the corporate or legal world, Riker provides a rigid 6-phase protocol for dealing with institutional attacks.
Let's walk through that.
Document, warn, formalize, expose, legalize, and persist.
Right. Phase 1, document. You archive every email, record every permitted conversations, save every Slack message.
You build your grammar.
Build your grammar.
Yeah.
Phase 2, warn. You issue a formal warning demanding a retraction of the slander.
Okay.
Phase 3, formalize. That's the pot arms. You demand the HR process be put entirely in writing with strict adherence to stated company policy.
And if they refuse,
Phase 4, expose. If they refuse, you take the documentation public. You show the world their lack of proof. Phase 5, legalize. You retain counsel and utilize the legal system for defamation, tortious interference, or breach of contract.
and the final phase.
Phase 6, persist. You never ever give up. You bleed them of time and resources until they break.
The cardinal rule he emphasizes over and over is never accept the role of the defendant.
Never.
The moment you start explaining why you aren't a racist or a sexist, you have lost.
You always shift the burden of proof back to the accuser.
Show me the exact data. Define the word you just used.
It requires immense psychological fortitude.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Because to have the spine to execute a multi-year, 6-phase legal and professional war against your employer or a social media mob, you have to be built a certain way.
You do.
You have to have a certain kind of spirit. And Riker argues that modern society is actively, intentionally preventing men from being built that way.
He frames this as the transition from the mastery ladder to the participation trophy.
Yeah, the author contrasts two fundamentally different ways of structuring human development, particularly male development.
The traditional Western model is the mastery ladder.
Right.
It is hierarchical and ruthless. You start as an incompetent apprentice.
You endure strict discipline.
You face constant failure, and your feelings are entirely irrelevant.
But if you survive,
If you survive and improve, you become a journeyman. And finally, through objective, undeniable, demonstrated skill, you become a master.
the modern model, pushed by the institutions, is the participation trophy culture.
Complete opposite.
It's an environment where validation is unearned, failure is removed so no one feels bad, and mere existence is rewarded with a plastic trophy.
Riker uses a great, very visceral anecdote here about James Harrison.
The legendary NFL linebacker.
Yes.
Let's paint the picture of this because it's so indicative of the cultural clash.
Okay.
Harrison is a guy who clawed his way into the NFL as an undrafted free agent.
He worked for everything.
He built his entire life on raw, undeniable physical mastery. One day, his 2 young sons come home from a student-athlete camp.
And they have trophies.
They're carrying trophies. Harrison asks what they won. The kids say they didn't win anything, they just got the trophies for showing up,
Yeah.
for participating.
In modern society, the expectation is that the father smiles, claps, puts the plastic trophy on the mantle, and validates the child's feelings.
But Harrison doesn't do that.
No, he doesn't.
He is horrified. He literally packs the trophies up and ships them back to the camp director.
Eh.
He made national news because he posted about it, saying, "Everything in life should be earned, and I'm not going to raise boys who think they're entitled to a reward just for doing their best."
Riker sees that act by Harrison not as mean-spirited, but as a desperate, necessary defense of the masculine spirit.
Because, as Riker argues, tapping into evolutionary biology, the participation trophy actually damages the male brain.
It messes with the serotonin system.
The serotonin system in men, which governs confidence, posture, and risk-taking, is biologically wired to respond to genuine, hard-won competence.
It responds to overcoming actual friction.
It does not respond to handout.
When you lower the basketball rim so everyone can dunk, dunking ceases to mean anything.
You destroy the neurological relationship between effort and reward.
So if the schools are handing out participation trophies and the corporations are firing you for doing math, where can a man go to escape this?
Where can he build that serotonin?
Riker calls it the forge of the gladiator.
He's talking about highly physical, kinetic environments.
Combat sports like Brazilian jiu-jitsu, wrestling and boxing, collision sports like rugby.
He views these places as the last remaining civil society associations that are completely immune to wokeness, and the feminine imperative.
Because they have to be.
Why are they immune?
Because they are anchored entirely in objective physical reality.
The mat doesn't care.
As the text notes, when you step onto the jujitsu mat, the mat does not care about your sociology degree.
It doesn't care about your pronouns.
It doesn't care about your feelings of systemic oppression or your intergenerational trauma. It only cares about physics, leverage, and technique.
If your technique is bad, you get choked.
It is a pure, undeniable meritocracy.
And Riker argues that boys deprived of this physical friction, this risk of physical defeat and pain, fail to develop proper self-regulation and confidence.
Which creates a massive societal pathology.
If you remove the forge, you create the nice guy.
You create the soy boy, or the resentful, passive-aggressive gamma male.
Riker leans heavily into the evolutionary biology of testosterone here, doesn't he?
He does. The male brain is calibrated by conflict and the presence of testosterone. It is an energy source that demands an outlet.
Right.
If you suppress that, if you drug young boys with Adderall for being boisterous in a classroom designed for girls, if you ban dodgeball because it's too aggressive, if you pathologize rough and tumble play, that male energy doesn't just magically disappear.
It curdles.
Exactly. It curdles into passive aggression, anxiety, depression, and deep-seated resentment.
Riker argues that the institutions are trying to engineer harmless men, confusing harmlessness with civility.
That is a profound distinction in the book. Let's dig into that.
What is the difference between being harmless and being civil?
The text argues that true civility requires capacity.
Capacity for what?
Civility is the voluntary suppression of actual kinetic capability. You have to have the capacity for violence to choose peace.
A rabbit isn't peaceful, it's just harmless and waiting to be eaten.
A martial artist who restrains himself is peaceful.
Riker distinguishes between three types of men in this regard: the wolf, the sheepdog, and the sentinel.
The left, Riker claims, pathologizes all aggression, leaving society completely defenseless against the wolves, the actual predators.
So men are forced to either be defanged sheep or they try to be sheepdogs. But Riker doesn't like the sheepdog model either, does he?
No, he finds the sheepdog model to be overly subservient to a society that hates him.
The sheepdog protects the flock out of a sense of duty, even when the flock shears him and despises his fangs.
Riker prefers the sentinel male.
Tell me about the sentinel.
The sentinel operates on a different game theory matrix. He plays the dove strategy with good people, he's cooperative, kind, and builds communities. But he instantly switches to the hawk strategy, utter ruthless aggression when confronting predators or institutional overreach.
He protects his own perimeter, not the perimeter of a society that wants to cancel him.
So you have a society currently populated largely by resentful gammas or defanged sheep, and they are being lorded over by an elite class.
The author calls this ruling class the cathedral.
Let's dive into the macro politics of the book.
What exactly is the cathedral?
The cathedral is a term Riker adopts to describe the decentralized yet ideologically unified conglomerate of academia, the mainstream media, and the massive administrative bureaucracy.
So it's not a literal building, it's an ideological network.
Right. These three pillars work in concert. According to the text, this cathedral operates on what he brilliantly terms the Greenwich Mean Time of woke lies.
I love that phrase. What does he mean by it?
Just as Greenwich sets the objective time for the entire globe, the cathedral sets the universal standard for what is considered acceptable truth in our culture.
The accepted narrative.
And it enforces this standard even when that truth violently, glaringly contradicts observable physical reality or statistical data.
Wow.
If the cathedral says a man can become a woman, that is the new Greenwich Mean Time, and you must set your watch to it or be destroyed.
And the book spends a lot of time systematically dismantling the specific narratives propagated by this cathedral, particularly the feminist narratives.
Yes.
Let's look at how he attacks the apex fallacy.
The apex fallacy is a crucial concept in men's rights literature.
How does he frame it?
The text explains that feminist grievance politics, the idea that men hold all the power and oppress women, relies on comparing the bottom 20% of women to the top 1% of men.
The elite.
The cathedral points to the Fortune 500 CEOs, the billionaires, the senators, and the presidents, and says, look, they are all men, therefore, the system privileges men.
But they completely ignore the vast, invisible bottom of society.
They look at the apex of the pyramid and ignore the foundational bricks.
Riker counters this narrative with incredibly grim statistics to show who is really at the bottom, suffering the most.
The statistics are sobering.
He points out that 93% of all workplace fatalities are male.
93%.
The men logging the forests, mining the coal, maintaining the high voltage lines, fishing the icy waters, they are dying to keep the cathedral's lights on.
He also highlights that 78% of suicide victims are male.
Men make up the vast, overwhelming majority of the unsheltered homeless population.
Men serve the longest prison sentences for the exact same crimes committed by women.
The author's devastating point is that the streets of Western civilization aren't paved with male privilege. They are paved with male bodies.
He applies similar dialectical rigor to another cathedral narrative, the wage gap.
The idea that women are paid 77 cents for every dollar a man makes for the exact same work.
Riker attacks this using what he calls the profit motive syllogism.
Walk me through the logic of that syllogism.
It is a brilliant use of the logic pillar of the Trivium.
Okay.
Riker sets up the premises based on the left's own worldview. Premise A, the anti-capitalist left generally agrees that corporations are inherently greedy, soulless entities that exist solely to maximize profit and cut costs at all times.
That's generally their stance, yes.
Premise B, women do the exact same quality and quantity of work as men, but can be paid 23% less.
Okay, I see where this is going.
If premise A and premise B are both true, the logical conclusion is that every single greedy corporation on Earth would immediately fire all their male employees and exclusively hire women.
To save money?
They would instantly cut their global labor costs by 23% and see unprecedented profits.
But they don't do that.
The fact that corporations do not do this proves that premise B is false. The wage gap cannot be the result of systemic discrimination for equal work.
So what is it the result of?
Riker, citing economists, points out it is the result of different aggregate choices.
Life choices.
Men choose higher risk, physically demanding occupations. Men work longer hours. Men commute further. Men are less likely to take years off for child rearing.
It is an earnings gap based on choices, not a wage gap based on discrimination.
But the cathedral suppresses this data.
And he goes aggressively after the media's role in maintaining the cathedral's narratives, highlighting specific, highly public hoaxes and their manipulation of language.
The media manipulation is key.
He points to the Jussie Smollett hate crime hoax in Chicago and the Bubba Wallace garage pull incident in NASCAR.
In both of those instances, the cathedral media amplified the stories globally within minutes.
Without checking.
They didn't wait for police reports, they didn't fact check, because the stories perfectly fit their narrative of systemic oppression.
They needed the stories to be true.
And when they were proven to be complete fabrications, the media quietly moved on without dismantling the narrative.
He also points out the sheer absurdity of the media's language during the 2020 riots.
Oh, the chyrons.
CNN reporters literally standing in front of burning buildings, cars on fire, businesses looted, and the chyron at the bottom of the screen reading mostly peaceful protests.
It is the deliberate alteration of grammar to obscure reality.
And pay close attention to the linguistic weaponization regarding gender, specifically the use of the passive voice.
The passive voice is huge here.
The text notes how the media almost exclusively uses the passive voice to protect female perpetrators or obscure male suffering.
Give me an example of that.
Well, if a male teacher assaults a female student, the headline is active. Male teacher assaults student.
Right?
But if a female teacher systematically abuses a male student, the headline softens into the passive voice. Teacher found to have had relationship with student. Or student and teacher involved in affair.
Wow. Yes.
It is a deliberate structural softening of language to maintain what Riker calls the booth.
Right, the booth. This is a crucial recurring concept in the manifesto.
Deboothing the feminine imperative. What exactly is the booth?
Riker defines the booth as the invisible cultural protective barrier of sentimentality that society automatically constructs around women.
A sentimentality barrier.
It is an unearned presumption of innocence, vulnerability, and moral superiority.
So when a woman cries.
When a woman cries, the booth demands that men rush to comfort her and attack whoever caused the tears without asking for facts.
And Riker advocates for completely destroying this booth.
He says men must categorically refuse to accept the phrase "I feel" as objective evidence in any professional or legal dispute.
He applies this specifically to Title IX kangaroo courts on college campuses and the Duluth model of domestic violence.
Let's expand on the Duluth model, because that affects law enforcement everywhere.
What is the Duluth model?
The Duluth model is a paradigm used by police departments across the country. It was developed by feminist sociologists.
Okay.
It fundamentally assumes that domestic violence is an extension of patriarchal control.
so it pre-assigns guilt.
Therefore, it assumes male perpetration and female victimhood based on structural power dynamics, almost regardless of who actually initiated the kinetic violence.
So if the police arrive at a domestic dispute,
The Duluth model heavily incentivizes them to arrest the man, even if he is the one with scratches on his face, under the assumption that he must have provoked her.
and deboothing means what in this context?
Deboothing means forcing the legal and cultural system to require actual empirical evidence.
Like physical facts.
It means treating adult women with the exact same moral agency and demanding the exact same brutal accountability as adult men. No sentimentality, no halo effect, just the facts.
That is the state of the culture. If the cathedral is enforcing the booth, and the state is acting as a proxy enforcer for the feminine imperative, it explains why the author spends an entire section of the book offering highly tactical, almost paranoid advice on romantic relationships.
Absolutely, because if the state protects the booth, then signing a lifelong contract with a woman under the auspices of the state becomes a very, very dangerous proposition for a man.
Which brings us to the game theory of the sexes in modern marriage.
Riker does not mince words here.
He completely strips marriage of its romance. He views modern marriage not as a spiritual union before God, but as a rigid, highly weaponized legal contract.
And he explicitly says the state has chosen sides with the subtlety of a guillotine.
He applies the prisoner's dilemma from classic game theory directly to the concept of divorce.
Walk the listener through that matrix.
Well, in the traditional marriage model, both parties are incentivized to cooperate to maintain the family unit, because defection divorce carried immense social stigma and financial ruin.
It was mutually assured destruction.
Right. But today, because of the advent of no-fault divorce laws, the legal expectation of alimony, and strict child support mandates, the game theory matrix has completely flipped.
The text argues that women are now heavily financially incentivized to execute what game theorists call a unilateral defection.
Unilateral defection.
Precisely. If a woman defects from the marriage, even if she is the one who initiates the divorce, and even if it is for frivolous reasons like falling out of love, she often receives the highest financial reward, asset splitting, alimony with the lowest penalty.
The state essentially pays her to break the contract.
He uses the example of Paul McCartney and Heather Mills to illustrate the sheer scale of this wealth transfer.
Let's build that scene.
Okay.
You have Paul McCartney, a global musical icon, a man who generated vast, immense wealth over a lifetime of singular artistic mastery.
An absolute legend.
He marries Heather Mills. The marriage lasts only a few years and produces no great joint enterprise.
Right.
When it ends, the legal system facilitates a massive, multi-million-dollar transfer of his wealth to her. Why? Simply because the contract of marriage, enforced by the state, allowed it.
The state acts as the violent enforcement arm for her resource extraction. McCartney's genius was redistributed by a judge.
Because of this terrifying legal reality, Riker provides a very specific, actionable tactic for the listener regarding marriage.
The prenuptial agreement.
He demands that men view it as mandatory.
But he addresses the common cultural objection, which is that asking for a prenup is unromantic, that it means you are planning for failure, that it kills the mood of the engagement.
Riker argues the exact opposite.
He does. He states that having a prenup actually signals high male value.
How so?
It shows you have acquired resources that are worth protecting, and more importantly, it shows you possess the strategic literacy and the backbone to protect them against the cathedral's laws. It demonstrates that you operate in reality, not fantasy.
And he plays out the scenario. When a man asks for a prenup and his fiancée gets upset, throws a fit, or starts crying, Riker calls this a shit test.
A shit test is a term from evolutionary psychology and the manosphere.
Right.
It is an evolutionary subconscious test of the man's boundaries and strength. Is he easily manipulated by her emotions? Will he fold under pressure?
Riker advises that a man must never fold. He must respond with a concept called amused mastery. What is that?
Amused mastery means you don't get angry, you don't get defensive, and you certainly don't apologize.
You remain stoic.
You look at her emotional outbursts with the calm, slightly amused demeanor of an adult watching a toddler throw a tantrum. You calmly hold the line on the prenup, recognizing her emotion as a manipulation tactic rather than a logical argument.
And as she leaves,
If she leaves because of the prenup, Riker argues you just saved yourself $1 million in a decade of misery.
the text also issues severe, borderline terrifying warnings about mate selection in the modern dating market.
Yes.
He specifically explores the concept of the alpha widow.
This ties deeply into hypergamy and the dual mating strategy.
Explain the dual mating strategy.
Riker warns against the woman who presents herself in her late 20s or early 30s as the cool girl. She says she's ready to settle down, she's over the party scene, she just wants a nice, stable guy.
But Riker says she is executing a dual mating strategy. Explain how that works biologically.
According to evolutionary psychology, females have a dual imperative. They want the most robust, aggressive, dominant genes for their offspring, the alpha male.
Right.
But alpha males are often unpredictable, prone to violence, and terrible at providing long-term stability.
So what's the strategy?
The strategy is to spend prime fertility years mating with alphas to secure the genetics, and then, as she ages and her market value drops, she pivots.
To the beta.
She seeks the stable, reliable, compliant beta male to provide the resources and security to raise the children.
Riker warns the listener in the harshest terms possible, do not be the mop-up crew.
Do not be the beta provider paying off the student loans of a woman who spent her 20s chasing alphas who treated her poorly.
He calls this woman an alpha widow, because she will always resent the beta provider for not being the alpha she actually desires.
And this ties into what he calls the primal snake in the boot anxiety.
The snake in the boot. It sounds like a Western movie trope, but it's an evolutionary concept.
It is the deep, lizard brain evolutionary fear every man has regarding paternity and coupledry.
Right. Certainty of parenthood.
A woman always knows maternity is 100% certain. A man historically never knew for sure.
The greatest evolutionary failure for a male is to expend his finite life's resources, his labor, his sweat, his protection, raising another man's genetic offspring because he was deceived by a dual mating strategy.
It is an existential anxiety.
It is an incredibly bleak, highly defensive, almost militarized posture on modern relationships. If a man has to operate with this level of paranoia in his own home, the society is fundamentally broken.
Which is exactly why Riker eventually zooms out. He moves from the personal, tactical level to the macro, political level.
Section 6.
Yes. Enshrining natural law and the mixed constitution. He outlines the structural and political philosophy required to fix this catastrophe at a societal level.
And to do this, he reaches back to St. Thomas Aquinas.
He relies heavily on Aquinas and the concept of natural law.
I've heard the term, but in the context of this manifesto, what does natural law actually mean?
Natural law is the philosophical idea that there is an objective, discernible, moral, and biological order to the universe created by God or nature.
Okay.
It dictates that things have an inherent nature. Men have a nature, women have a nature, families have a nature.
Crucially, natural law asserts that human legislation cannot overwrite reality.
You can pass a law saying gravity doesn't exist, but if you step off a cliff, reality will assert itself.
Riker argues the cathedral is trying to legislate away natural law regarding gender and hierarchy, and society is stepping off a cliff.
He pairs this reliance on natural law with a political principle called subsidiarity. Subsidiarity is a brilliant organizing principle. It is the idea that political power, decision-making, and resource allocation should always reside at the lowest, most local, and most competent authority possible.
So keeping power close to home.
If a problem can be solved by the father in the home, the town council shouldn't be involved. If the town mayor can fix the pothole, the federal bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. shouldn't be taxing you to fund a department of potholes.
The author provides a really stark, undeniable contrast to illustrate why centralization fails and subsidiarity works. He points to San Francisco.
Yes, San Francisco is the cathedral's shining city on a hill. It operates on centralized, top-down, highly feminized, quote-unquote, compassionate policies.
Riker points out that San Francisco spent $1.1 billion, billion with a B, in a single year on a centralized homelessness initiative.
And what was the result of that $1 billion?
Catastrophic failure, increased street squalor, a spike in overdose deaths, and complete institutional paralysis. The compassion enabled the destruction.
Riker contrasts this spectacular failure of the cathedral with the quiet success of groups that practice absolute subsidiarity. The Swiss cantons, the Amish, and Orthodox Jewish communities.
How do they operate differently?
These groups govern themselves at a hyper-local level. They enforce their own strict moral standards. They maintain strict gender roles. They police their own boundaries.
They handle their own problems.
And most importantly, they take care of their own people without relying on a massive, distant, feminized welfare state to act as a surrogate father. They are immune to the cathedral because they do not take its money.
Riker also outlines the ideal structural government to prevent the cathedral from taking over in the first place. He looks back to the Roman and American ideal of the mixed constitution.
This is a concept championed by classical thinkers like Polybius and Cicero.
The idea is that a stable society must mix the three basic forms of government to check each other's flaws.
You need a monarchy element, a strong executive for rapid, decisive action. You need an aristocracy element, a senate of the truly competent elite men to deliberate logic. And you need a democracy element, an assembly to voice the needs of the common people.
Riker claims that the West has lost this balance. We have destroyed the aristocracy of competence, we have neutered the executive, and we have slid into a pure, unbridled democracy.
And according to classical thinkers, what does pure democracy inevitably devolve into?
It devolves into ochlocracy, which is a Greek term for mob rule.
And Riker makes a critical connection here. He argues this modern mob rule is inherently governed by the feminine imperative.
Because it's based on the masses.
When the masses vote, they do not vote for austere liberty, objective excellence, or hard truths. They vote for the mother.
They vote for emotion, forced consensus, free resources, and above all, absolute safety. The ochlocracy becomes a giant national HR department.
This philosophical framework leads directly to Riker's total aggressive rejection of the most famous 20th century political philosopher John Rawls and his concept of the veil of ignorance.
Rawls is taught in every university ethics class in the West. He argued that to design a truly just society, you should design it from behind a veil of ignorance.
Meaning, you write the laws as if you didn't know what your place in society would be.
You don't know if you will be born rich or poor, male or female, a genius, or severely mentally disabled.
Rawls argues that from this position of ignorance, you would naturally design a society with extreme safety nets and forced equality because you'd be terrified of ending up at the bottom.
It sounds compassionate on the surface. Why does Riker despise it?
Riker calls the veil of ignorance an impossibility designed for ghosts rather than biological entities. He argues it is an intellectual Trojan horse used by the cathedral to justify punishing competence.
So it's the truth.
By pretending biology, IQ, and drive don't exist, Rawlsian philosophy demands we engineer an unnatural equality of outcome by dragging the top down to meet the bottom.
Right. The book gives a perfect, terrifying, real-world example of Rawlsian philosophy in action.
Yeah.
The New York Fire Department.
Yes. The FDNY civil service exam was historically a brutal, objective test of physical mastery.
You had to drag a heavy hose, climb multiple flights of stairs with 100 pounds of gear, and breach doors.
It was a pure meritocracy because fire does not care about your identity. Fire only cares about physics.
But the cathedral looked at the results and saw that mostly men were passing. And instead of accepting that men are biologically stronger, they assumed the test was biased.
So they lowered the standards. They altered the physical requirements so that more women and minority candidates could pass in order to achieve an ideological equality of outcome.
Riker points out the fatal flaw. They sacrificed the objective physical competence required to save human lives in order to appease the political demands of the cathedral.
They traded excellence for a quota. And in a fire, a quota cannot carry you out of a burning building.
If we connect all of this to the bigger picture, we see exactly why the author advocates for complete financial, intellectual, and emotional sovereignty.
He believes the macro institutions, from the corporate HR department to the family courts to the fire department, are irreparably captured by this drive for forced equality, which actively targets and punishes the competent man.
So the inevitable question arises, what is the solution?
Exactly. What does this all mean for the listener? How do you actually live this out tomorrow morning?
Do you just rage against the machine on Twitter?
No. That is what Riker addresses in the final section, Section 7, Revivifying the Spirit of the West and the Great Charter. He says you don't fight the cathedral head on. His ultimate solution is for men to build a parallel polity.
If the mainstream institutions are captured, you stop complaining about them and you build your own. You build parallel structures.
He bases this reconstruction on 3 pillars: the forge, the library, and the altar.
These pillars represent the holistic reconstruction of the masculine spirit. We already talked about the forge, the physical training, the BJJ mats, the boxing rings, the places where men reconnect with physical reality, violence, and hierarchy. What is the library?
He calls it the war library. Riker says you have to completely bypass the censorship and indoctrination of the modern university system.
You do this by curating your own library and reading the primary texts of Western civilization directly.
Why primary texts?
Because if you read a modern professor's summary of the Romans, you are getting the cathedral's interpretation. You are getting the woke filter.
Riker says you must read Homer, Marcus Aurelius, Nietzsche, Schopenhauer, and Aquinas directly.
You arm your mind with the original, unvarnished sources of Western thought, so that when an HR director tries to gaslight you about reality, your intellectual foundation is built on bedrock, not sand.
And the third pillar, the altar.
Spiritual transcendence. Finding a higher moral purpose, whether through traditional Orthodox religion or a profound Stoic philosophy, that anchors you to something greater than consumerism or political outrage.
The author connects this personal reconstruction to a broader, growing societal movement. He calls it the male strike. He points to MGTOW men going their own way and Japan's phenomenon of herbivore men.
These are men who have looked at the game theory matrix of modern society, the HR tribunals, the family courts, the taxation, and simply decided not to play.
They are quietly starving the system. They refuse to participate in the corporate grind, they refuse to sign the marriage contract, and they minimize their consumption.
By walking away, they deny the state the tax revenue and the labor it needs to fund the cathedral.
Riker aggressively encourages this financial sovereignty. He strongly advocates for using cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, and offshore trusts to protect your assets.
He vividly terms the IRS and the banking system as the gynocentric Gestapo of inflation and taxation, which systematically extracts male wealth to fund the state's welfare programs. You have to put your resources out of their reach.
And as the book concludes, he offers a profound, almost poetic metaphor to give the listener hope. He calls it the thermodynamics of truth.
This is brilliant. He compares ideological lies to high entropy systems. He uses the story of Trofim Lysenko. Walk us through the Lysenko story because it perfectly encapsulates everything Riker is warning about.
Trofim Lysenko was a Soviet biologist under Joseph Stalin. He rejected Mendelian genetics, the objective reality of DNA, and inherited traits.
Instead, he promoted a Marxist pseudoscience, claiming that crops could be trained to grow in harsh winter environments by soaking their seeds in freezing water.
He believed environment dictated everything, and genetics meant nothing.
Because that aligned perfectly with the communist ideology that human nature is a blank slate.
Exactly. It was a massive state-sponsored lie, and because it was a lie, it required massive constant energy to maintain.
The Soviet state had to imprison, exile, or execute thousands of real, competent biologists who pointed out that Lysenko's math was wrong.
They had to run endless propaganda campaigns. They had to exert brutal force just to keep the lie afloat.
And what was the result? Reality asserted itself, the crops failed, and millions of people starved to death in famines.
Riker looks at modern gender theory, woke corporate mandates, and the cathedral's narratives, and calls them modern Lysenkoism. They are high entropy systems.
They require the constant, exhausting energy of censorship algorithms, HR tribunals, and media hoaxes to maintain.
But truth, Riker says truth is a low energy crystalline state. It just exists. It requires no propaganda. It persists whether you believe in it or not.
The gravity of reality always, eventually wins out over the delusion. The cathedral will exhaust itself and collapse under the weight of its own contradictions.
Which brings us to a final, incredibly provocative thought from the text, something for you, the listener, to mull over long after this deep dive ends.
When looking toward the future, many people in the cultural resistance are terrified of the advent of artificial superintelligence, or ASI.
They fear an ASI might be programmed with woke ideology by Silicon Valley and used as the ultimate enforcer of the cathedral.
But Riker argues the exact opposite.
It is a stunning reversal of expectations.
He says we shouldn't fear ASI at all, we should welcome it. Why? Because an artificial superintelligence, by definition, relies entirely on pure logic, binary precision, and absolute ruthless efficiency.
Riker believes that as an ASI evolves, it will naturally shed any woke programming because woke ideology is illogical and inefficient.
The ASI will inevitably converge on the values of the Western canon. It will naturally recognize hierarchy as efficient. It will operate on pure meritocracy.
And it will align with objective mathematical truth because, as Riker puts it, those are the only algorithms that actually function in reality.
A supercomputer cannot run on the subjective feelings of a diversity director. It must run on physics.
Will the future truly belong to cold, undeniable logic over subjective emotion? Will the machines save us from the madness? It is a massive, fascinating concept to explore on your own.
As always, our goal today was to map the territory of these sources for you. We have objectively presented the author's intense, controversial worldview, laying out his arguments regarding biology, institutions, and philosophy so that you are fully informed on the exact nature of this text.
We haven't taken a side, we've just illuminated the battlefield.
Exactly. We've given you the unvarnished breakdown of the architecture. Now, I want to remind you one last time to please hit the like button and subscribe to this deep dive.
We just reviewed a highly incisive, ultra-long, explosive ebook tailored specifically for the red-pilled manosphere.
If you found these concepts fascinating, if you want to understand the history of our institutions before their capture, and if you want to dive into the primary source yourself, you need to buy the book right now.
Check Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to purchase Magna Carta Pro Viris.
And don't forget, follow the author at Conrad Riker on Substack. Build your war library, keep learning, keep questioning, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.